Victoria loved him with all her heart, long before the wealth and the pride stepped in. He was just David, a man with nothing to hide.
Hi lovelies, welcome back again to another interesting story. What if I tell you that anyone can betray you? Even the people you think that you sacrificed for, they can betray you. They can turn their back against you. Most especially in the trying times, they can disappoint you. They can fail you. So let's dive into the story and see how it unfolds.
Some people say money changes people. Others say success only reveals who a person truly is. But if you ask the people who knew David Eze many years ago, they would tell you something different. They would tell you that David was not always the proud and stubborn man people later came to know. Once upon a time, David Eze was a man whose heart was as warm as the early morning sun. He laughed easily, he respected people, he loved deeply, and above all, he loved one woman with every beat of his heart. Sadly, life has a strange way of testing people. Sometimes it is not poverty that destroys a family. Sometimes it is wealth. Sometimes it is pride. And sometimes it is one dangerous belief that quietly enters a person's heart like smoke entering a room. You cannot see it at first, but before long, it fills every corner until no fresh air remains. This is the story of David Eze, the woman who stood beside him when he had almost nothing, the mistake that destroyed 3 innocent lives, and the painful lesson that came when it was already too late. If you think this story ends the way you expect, keep listening, because life has a way of surprising those who think they are in control. David was 28 years old when he first met Victoria Williams. At that time, he was just an ordinary transporter in Enugu. He owned only one old delivery van that coughed louder than its engine. Every time he started it, the vehicle shook like an old man trying to stand after sitting for too long. Some days, the van broke down twice before noon. Some weeks, David made barely enough money to feed himself. Yet, anyone who met him could see something special in his eyes. He carried hope like a man carrying a bright lantern on a dark road. He believed that one day his life would change. He just did not know how.
Victoria Williams was very different. She came from a respected family. Her father, Chief Edward Williams, was one of the most successful businessmen in Enugu. He owned farms, buildings, and several businesses. If Victoria wanted a life of comfort, she already had it. Many wealthy young men wanted to marry her. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, even politicians visited her father's house, hoping to win her heart. But Victoria was never impressed by expensive cars or heavy bank accounts. She believed that a person's character was more valuable than the clothes they wore. One rainy afternoon, she stopped at a small restaurant to escape the heavy rain. The rain fell so hard that the roof sounded like thousands of tiny drums beating at the same time. Almost every table was occupied. Only one seat remained. It happened to be opposite David. David stood up politely. "You can sit here if you don't mind." Victoria smiled. "Thank you." That simple smile was like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. Neither of them knew that a simple act of kindness was about to change their lives forever. As they waited for their food, they started talking. The conversation flowed as gently as a river. David spoke honestly about his struggles. He did not pretend to be rich. He did not exaggerate his achievements. He simply spoke like a man who had nothing to hide. Victoria listened carefully. The more she listened, the more she admired him. Not because he was successful, but because he was genuine.
Before they left the restaurant, David smiled shyly. "I don't know if we'll ever meet again, but I would like to." Victoria laughed softly. "I think we will." And somehow, they did. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. They met in parks, small restaurants, church programs. Sometimes they walked together without spending a single naira, simply talking about life and their dreams. David often said, "One day I will build a company that people will respect." Victoria never laughed at him. Instead, she would reply, "I already believe you." Those 5 words became the fuel that kept David moving whenever life became difficult. Not everyone supported their relationship. When Victoria's friends heard she wanted to marry an ordinary transporter,
Many thought she had lost her mind. One afternoon, her closest friend held her hand and asked, "Victoria, are you sure about this man?" She smiled confidently. "I have never been more sure of anything." "But he is poor." Victoria looked through the window before answering. "Money can grow, but a good heart is difficult to find." Her friend shook her head. "You may regret this." Victoria smiled again. "I don't think loving a good man can ever be a mistake." Unknown to her, life was already preparing a painful surprise. When Chief Edward Williams discovered that his daughter wanted to marry David, he did not become angry. Instead, he invited David to his house. David was nervous. The mansion looked like a place where kings lived. As he walked through the large compound, he felt like a village boy entering a palace for the first time.
Chief Edward welcomed him warmly. The older man studied David quietly for a few moments before speaking. "So, you are the young man who wants to marry my daughter?" David nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." The old man smiled. "I have made inquiries about you." David's heart almost stopped. "I hear you are hardworking." "Yes, sir." "I hear you are honest." "I try my best, sir." "And I hear you love my daughter." David smiled. "More than words can explain." Chief Edward remained silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up and walked toward the window. Without turning around, he said quietly, "Young man, I am giving her to you because I believe you will protect her heart." David immediately stood up. His voice became emotional. "I promise you, sir, I will never make your daughter regret marrying me." The old man turned around and smiled. "I pray you keep that promise." A few months later, David and Victoria got married. It was not the biggest wedding in Enugu. There were no famous musicians, no long convoy of luxury cars. But there was something money could never buy. There was genuine love. Throughout the ceremony, David could not stop looking at his bride. She looked beautiful in her white wedding gown, like a fresh flower blooming after the first rain of the season. He whispered softly, "I will spend the rest of my life making you happy." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I know." Those simple words carried more trust than either of them could imagine. Neither of them knew that years later, those promises would be tested in ways neither money nor love alone could withstand. At first, marriage was not easy. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. The roof leaked whenever it rained. Sometimes they placed buckets around the sitting room to catch the dripping water. On difficult days, Victoria would laugh and say, "One day we'll laugh about all this." David would smile, by God's grace. They had very little, but somehow they always found happiness. Sometimes they shared one plate of food. Sometimes they sat outside at night, watching the stars and talking about the future. To them, those moments were worth more than gold, because peace lived in their home. And where peace lives, even a small house can feel like a mansion. Little did they know, their greatest test was still waiting quietly in the future, like a storm gathering far beyond the horizon. The first 2 years of David and Victoria's marriage were not easy. Some mornings, David left home before the first cock crowed, carrying a small leather bag that had seen better days. He would return long after sunset, his shirt soaked with sweat and dust from the road. Yet, no matter how tired he was, one thing never changed. The moment he opened the door, Victoria welcomed him with the same gentle smile.
Sometimes, the food on the table was simple, just rice and stew or yam with vegetables. But David always joked as he ate. "My wife," he would say with a grin, "even if you serve me plain water, it will still taste sweet because you prepared it." Victoria would laugh and playfully tap his shoulder. "You're only saying that because you are hungry." Their laughter filled the little apartment like music. Their neighbors often admired them. "Those two," one elderly neighbor would say, "love each other like 2 birds building one nest." Months turned into years. Although money was still scarce, their love continued to grow. Then one afternoon, life brought news that shook Victoria to her very soul. Her father, Chief Edward Williams, had suddenly fallen seriously ill. The entire family rushed to the hospital. David stayed beside his father-in-law every day, praying and encouraging him. But despite the doctor's efforts, Chief Edward peacefully passed away a few days later. His death spread across Enugu like wildfire. Hundreds of people attended his burial. Business associates, church members, community leaders, friends. Many described him as a generous man whose door was always open to those in need. Victoria cried as though a part of her heart had been buried with her father. David held her throughout the funeral. "My love," he whispered, "your father lived a good life. I know this is painful, but you are not alone. We will get through this together." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder. She believed every word. A few weeks after the burial, the family gathered in the late chief's mansion for the reading of his will. Everyone sat quietly as the family lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. Chief Edward had shared his properties fairly among his children. When it was Victoria's turn, the lawyer paused before speaking. "To my beloved daughter, Victoria, I leave the sum of 200 million naira, together with 2 commercial properties in Enugu and all the income they generate." A soft murmur spread across the room. Some relatives exchanged surprised glances. Others nodded with approval. Everyone knew Chief Edward had trusted Victoria deeply. After the meeting ended, several relatives surrounded her with advice. Use the money to secure your future. Invest in your own business. Build houses. Buy land. You are lucky. Victoria smiled politely and thanked everyone, but deep inside, another thought had already taken roots.
That evening, she returned home carrying a brown envelope. David was sitting at the small dining table, calculating transport expenses with an old calculator whose buttons had begun to fade. He looked up and smiled. "Welcome home." Victoria placed the envelope gently before him. "I have something to discuss with you." David noticed the seriousness on her face. "What is it?" Without saying a word, she opened the envelope and carefully arranged several documents on the table. Bank statements, property papers, investment certificates. David frowned in confusion. "What am I looking at?" Victoria looked into his eyes. "My inheritance." David slowly nodded. "It is a blessing. Your father planned well." She smiled. "It is our blessing." David shook his head immediately. "No." Victoria blinked. "No? I cannot touch your father's inheritance." She reached across the table and gently held his hand. "My father believed in me. I believe in you." David lowered his eyes. She continued softly. "You have dreams much bigger than this little office. You have worked hard every day. You only need an opportunity." David's voice became emotional. "But this is everything your father left for you." Victoria smiled warmly. "And who am I going to spend it on, if not my husband and the family we are building together?" Tears gathered in David's eyes. "No one has ever believed in me the way you do." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Then don't disappoint me." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was peaceful, like cool evening air after a hot afternoon. Finally, David stood up. He walked around the table and embraced his wife tightly. "I promise you, Victoria, I will never forget today. As long as I live, I will never stop loving you." Victoria closed her eyes. Those words settled in her heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. She had no idea that one day those very words would return to haunt her. Within a few months, David began expanding his business. The old delivery van was replaced with 3 newer trucks. Soon, 3 trucks became 7, 7 became 15. His small rented office became too crowded, forcing him to move into a larger building. For the first time in his life, contracts began finding him instead of him chasing them. Banks that once ignored him now invited him for meetings. Investors wanted partnerships. His company grew like a tree planted beside a flowing river, strong, steady, and impossible to ignore. Every newspaper seemed to carry his name. People began calling him one of Enugu's fastest rising businessmen. Whenever reporters interviewed him, they praised his intelligence, discipline, and business sense. David accepted every compliment with a smile, but each time he returned home, he would look at Victoria and say, "If not for you, none of this would have happened." Victoria would simply smile. She never asked for public recognition. She never demanded that people know whose sacrifice built the foundation of the company. Seeing her husband succeed was enough for her. As David became busier, Victoria quietly took on another responsibility. She managed their home. She handled every family need. She made sure peace never departed from their house. If David returned home exhausted, she was there. If business pressure weighed heavily on him, she encouraged him. She became the quiet strength behind the successful man the world admired. It was around this time that God blessed them with their first child. The entire family celebrated the pregnancy with excitement. David could hardly contain himself. He bought baby clothes months before the due date. He painted in nursery. He attended every medical appointment he could. On the day Victoria went into labor, David paced up and down outside the delivery room. His hands shook like leaves dancing in a strong wind.
After what felt like forever, the doctor finally stepped outside wearing a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Eze." David rushed forward. "How is my wife?" "She is fine." "And the baby?" The doctor chuckled. "You have a healthy baby girl." For a brief second, David was silent. Then a broad smile spread across his face. "A daughter?" The doctor nodded. David laughed happily. "My daughter!" He entered the room, kissed Victoria on the forehead, and gently carried the tiny baby into his arms. She wrapped her tiny fingers around one of his. David's heart melted instantly. "Look at her," he whispered. "She already has your eyes." Victoria smiled weakly from the hospital bed. "What shall we call her?" David looked lovingly at the little girl. "Amanda, my first princess." Outside the room, however, another pair of eyes watched quietly. David's mother, Mama Ngozi. She smiled politely when she congratulated the couple, but as she walked away, she murmured under her breath, "It is all right. The next one will surely be a boy." Nobody paid attention to those words. After all, what harm could a few quiet words possibly do? Sometimes, the smallest spark is all it takes to set an entire forest on fire.